History is not written by presidents standing at podiums. It is written by trucks that stop moving, by factories that go quiet, by supply chains that reroute silently, permanently. In early 2025, the United States believed it was playing a game of leverage. Tariffs as weapons, 25% applied with executive force. The assumption was simple: pain would produce obedience. But here is the first truth you must confront. Modern economies do not submit, they adapt. When you strike an integrated system, you don't isolate your opponent. You shatter the structure that sustains you. And that is exactly what has happened. Canada and Mexico did not beg. They did not rush to Washington. They spoke to each other. What followed was not retaliation. It was something far more consequential: reconfiguration. If you care about where power really comes from in the 21st century, stay with me. Because before we talk about consequences, we must understand the fatal misconception that started this chain reaction. And it begins with a profound misunderstanding of what trade actually is. To understand what went wrong, we need to slow the story down for a moment. Not to soften it, but to clarify it. The administration framed tariffs as a correction, a way to restore balance, a tool to punish bad behavior and force better deals. That framing is seductive, and it is wrong. Trade in North America was never a contest between three separate nations. It was a system, a single production platform stretched across borders that mattered less and less with each passing decade. A car assembled in Michigan is not American in the way slogans suggest. It is the final chapter of a continental process. Parts from Ontario, wiring from Mexico, logistics synchronized to the hour. When you impose a blanket tariff on that system, you are not targeting a country. You are introducing friction into a machine that only works because friction was engineered out of it. This is the mistake at the center of everything that followed. Confusing leverage with disruption. Confusing strength with shock. And once that shock was delivered, the system did what all systems do under threat. It searched for a way around the damage. To see why that response was inevitable, we have to go back to how this continental machine was built in the first place. The North American economy did not emerge by accident. It was engineered slowly, deliberately over 30 years. NAFTA, and later the USMCA, were not simply trade agreements. They were architectural plans. They reorganized geography itself. Capital flowed north and south. Labor specialized. Infrastructure was laid not to compete, but to interlock. Borders became checkpoints, not barriers. This integration followed a basic economic logic. Proximity reduces cost. Trust reduces friction. Scale creates resilience. Factories were built on the assumption that parts would arrive on time, every time, that a truck crossing the Rio Grande was as routine as one crossing a state line, that disputes would be resolved through rules, not retaliation. Over time, this system produced extraordinary efficiency. North America became one of the most competitive manufacturing platforms on Earth, precisely because no single country tried to dominate the whole. But there was an unspoken condition underlying this success. Stability. The system could tolerate elections. It could tolerate policy shifts. What it could not tolerate was unpredictability weaponized as strategy. And when that assumption broke, history did not pause. It pivoted. The first rupture did not arrive as theory. It arrived as shock. In February 2025, the White House declared a national emergency. Fentanyl, migration, and with a single announcement, a blanket 25% tariff was imposed on every good crossing from Canada and Mexico. This was not surgical. It was indiscriminate. The logic was ancient, almost medieval. Inflict pain, force submission, trade as Ziegewaffe. But modern supply chains do not experience pain the way politicians imagine. They seize, they stall, they reroute. By March, the effects were unmistakable. Automotive plants in Ontario slowed. Factories in central Mexico froze mid-cycle, not because demand vanished, but because the math no longer worked. Every border crossing became a tax event. Every component carried a penalty. Costs cascaded faster than contracts could be rewritten. Supporters called it pressure. In reality, it was signal. A signal that agreements were provisional, that stability was conditional, that trust was expendable, and once that signal was sent, something irreversible happened. Instead of preparing retaliation, Canada and Mexico prepared escape. Because when a system learns it can be punished without warning, it stops negotiating and starts redesigning itself. What followed was not chaos. It was calculation. When Canada and Mexico assessed the damage, they reached the same conclusion. Retaliation would be futile. A tariff war favors the largest economy, at least in the short run. So they chose a different response. One that operates below the level of headlines. They began to remove the United States from the equation. This is the hidden mechanism most observers miss. Decoupling is not dramatic. It is logistical. Routes are redrawn. Contracts are reassigned. Standards are harmonized elsewhere. The Canada-Mexico strategic corridor emerged from this logic. Energy cooperation to reduce reliance on American exports, agricultural substitution to replace vulnerable suppliers, and most critically, a Pacific bypass. For decades, trade between Canada and Mexico flowed through American arteries. Interstates, rail hubs, border towns. The United States was the gatekeeper. Now, maritime links are being prioritized. Direct shipping from the Canadian West Coast to Mexican ports. Trade that treats the United States not as a hub, but as an obstacle. This is not symbolism. It is systems engineering. And once logistics change, politics becomes irrelevant. Because supply chains, once moved, do not return out of nostalgia. They return only if trust does. The second crisis did not announce itself with a press release. It unfolded on factory floors. The North American auto industry is the most integrated production system on Earth. No vehicle is purely national. Every car is a choreography of cross-border precision. When the tariffs took effect, that choreography collapsed. A wiring harness delayed in Mexico halted an assembly line in Michigan. Aluminum from Canada arrived carrying a tax that erased profit margins. Paperwork multiplied, delays stacked, costs exploded. Detroit felt it first. Already under pressure from electrification, the industry discovered that protection did not protect. It paralyzed. Instead of reshoring jobs, tariffs priced American vehicles out of their own markets. Exports stalled. Inventory piled up. Meanwhile, something remarkable happened just beyond U.S. borders. Canada and Mexico removed tariffs between themselves. A closed loop formed. A plant in Ontario could ship to Puebla without friction. A supplier in Mexico could scale production without fear of sudden penalty. Efficiency returned, just not on American soil. This is the cruel paradox of protectionism. Walls do not trap capital. They repel it. And capital, as always, move towards certainty, not lower wages, not weaker standards. Stability. And in 2025, stability no longer lives in the United States. Now I want you to step out of abstractions and into your own life, because this is where the cost becomes human. If you live in a border state, you've already felt it. The warehouse with fewer shifts, the trucking route that no longer runs, the supplier that quietly closed. You were told this policy was meant to protect you, to bring jobs home, to punish foreign competitors. But look at what actually happened. When a factory in Michigan can't afford components from Ontario or Mexico, it doesn't wait patiently for Washington to reconsider. It shuts down or it moves. And when it moves, it doesn't come back. The job losses don't arrive with fanfare. They arrive as hours cut, as contracts not renewed, as towns slowly hollowed out. This is the tragedy of economic nationalism. It promises dignity through isolation, but delivers insecurity through disruption. If this analysis resonates with you, if you recognize these patterns in your own community, don't turn away, share it. Talk about it. Because silence is how bad economics survives good people. And to understand why this pain doesn't stop at the border, we have to widen the lens. Because the consequences are no longer just North American. When alliances fracture, power does not disappear. It relocates. By treating Canada and Mexico as adversaries, the United States created a vacuum. And in geopolitics, vacuums are invitations. As Washington fixated on bilateral deficits and tariff schedules, other capitals paid attention. Trade delegations arrived quietly in Mexico City and Vancouver. Investment conversations began elsewhere. This is not conspiracy, it is arithmetic. When American markets become unpredictable, capital diversifies. When American borders become choke points, logistics flows around them. The new Canada-Mexico alignment does not openly challenge the United States. It does something far more dangerous. It makes the United States optional. Energy, agriculture, manufacturing, each pillar is being rewired to reduce exposure to American volatility. And as those links weaken, American influence weakens with them. Soft power erodes first, then strategic leverage, then relevance. For decades, the United States anchored the global order by being reliable. Not perfect, reliable. That reputation is now in question. And once trust leaves the room, it rarely returns on command. To understand what happens next, we have to confront the future directly. Not as hope or fear, but as systems responding to incentives. From this point forward, the future branches into three paths, not predictions, scenarios. The first is repair. Tariffs are rolled back. Damage is acknowledged. Trust is slowly rebuilt. This path is possible but narrow because supply chains remember trauma. They forgive slowly. The second is stagnation. Tariffs remain. Workarounds harden into permanent structures. Trade continues, but partnership dies. North America enters a cold peace, connected by geography, divided by design. This is the most likely outcome. The third path is fracture. The Canada-Mexico corridor deepens. Energy, agriculture, and manufacturing fully reorient. The United States becomes a peripheral market in its own hemisphere. Not collapsed, not conquered, simply bypassed. This is how decline actually happens. Not through catastrophe, but through exclusion. Not because others rise faster, but because you make yourself unreliable. Systems do not punish ideology. They respond to incentives. And right now, the incentive structure of North America is teaching the world a brutal lesson. Stability is more valuable than power. Trust is more valuable than leverage. Which brings us to the final question: what this moment ultimately costs and whether it can still be salvaged. Here is the final truth. This was never about trade balances. It was about misunderstanding power. In the 21st century, power does not come from coercion. It comes from being indispensable, from being trusted, from being the place systems want to pass through, not escape. By weaponizing tariffs against its closest neighbors, the United States did not assert dominance. It forfeited centrality. The Canada-Mexico alignment is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of survival. Markets did what markets always do when confronted with instability. They routed around it. And the cost is not abstract. It is paid in lost jobs, higher prices, stranded infrastructure, and a shrinking voice in a continent we once led. America remains large. But size without trust produces loneliness, not leadership. This story is not finished. Policies can change, but time cannot be reversed. Supply chains move, do not snap back on command. If you want to understand what real economic power looks like and why slogans fail, where systems endure, stay engaged, share this analysis. Question easy answers. Because the future of North America will not be decided by who shouts the loudest, but by who remains worth trusting. And in the next chapter, we must ask the hardest question of all. How do you rebuild trust after you've taught the world to live without you?